This is the Neurosurgery Podcast. Welcome back to the Neurosurgery Podcast. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Dr. Christian Bowers. Today, we're going to be talking about a very specific subject where Dr. Bowers is really, I think, making a huge impact on the field of neurosurgery as a field of neurosurgery. It's kind of one of those meta things where we're talking about changing the way we change the field, and you'll learn why very soon here. Unfortunately, Dr. Wang can't join us tonight. Ironically, he's stuck in a overrunning faculty meeting where they're talking about, the match residency training and things like that, which is very relevant to our conversation today. So, Dr. Bowers, please take a moment because we haven't had the pleasure to speak with you on the show before. Say hello to the audience and introduce yourself a little more fully.
Yeah, thanks for having me, GP. Dr. Christian Bowers. I am in my 8th year of practice, and I'm at Hurley Medical Center in Michigan. I did residency at the University of Utah, did a fellowship in skull-based surgery with Dr. Johnny Delishaw, and then practiced for 3 years in New York, and then 3 years in New Mexico with my mentor, Dr. Mike Schmidt. And we rebuilt the neurosurgery residency there and got the residency back at the University of New Mexico, and then moved here. So, and that's kind of my background. Been traditionally was skull-based, only did really skull-based brain tumor, and now I've been building kind of a tumor practice up here and doing a lot of trauma, traumatic brain and traumatic spinal injuries. And we kind of cover everything up here. It's an underserved area, so do a lot of pediatric trauma, like just kind of very broad practice that way. So
Great, and welcome to the show. But in addition to your thriving practice, you wear another hat where you conduct a lot of research. You have a laboratory, and some of the techniques you use in the lab and some of the research that you do is very relevant to the subject today. So talk a bit about the research work that you do.
yeah, so when I was hired to be an attending in New York and to be skull-based brain tumor specialist there at New York Medical College in Westchester, my mentor hired me also to like build the neurosurgery research program, which they didn't really have. And so from an early, kind of right from day one of my being an attending, I was kind of charged with building research infrastructure and a program. And I found very quickly that medical students were, super hungry. They were looking for any sort of mentorship and people to help out with. And so we started a kind of a research program there. I happened to have always been interested in clinical outcomes research since I was early on in my residency, and I'd started doing research. And when I was at the end of my fellowship, I'd always been studying clinical outcomes research, looking at Charleston Comorbidity Index and so forth, different ways of like trying to figure out how to avoid adverse outcomes and complications and morbidity and mortality. And at the end of my fellowship, I heard a talk by, when I was at Swedish, by Dr. John Street in Canada, who just was kind of introducing frailty. And it kind of struck perfect with me because I was, I grew up a large part of my life and in residency in Utah, there's a lot of older, healthy people who, didn't smoke and drink. They were exercised. And so we were getting good outcomes, better than what was reported in the literature. So this concept had always resonated with me, but I didn't know the terms behind it, right? Because we just had Charleston Comorbidity Index. And so when I heard that, it was right before I was leaving to New York, and I just knew the minute I heard that lecture, I was like, I'm going to spend my career like in this space. Like it just fit perfect. And the first paper we kind of had worked on was a review of the frailty literature, and there'd been like 5 papers in cranial and 20 in spine at that point in 2017. And so I think in the last 3 years, we've published 100 papers on the topics and on frailty and frailty related topics. And I've had a lot of experience working with medical students. We built our residency based on this research program at the University of New Mexico. And we published the experience with this intensive research initiative we did in New York. And then we did it again in New Mexico, and the results were even more strong. And we published that as well. And so I've had a lot, basically of my 8 years, getting ready to start my 9th, I've spent all that time kind of working with hundreds of medical students, not directly one-on-one all the time, but in the lab and underneath other residents or pre-residents. And I've had a lot of time to think about the problems and the challenges. And if you look at the graph of the publication arms race, when I applied to neurosurgery residency in 2009, it was like one publication, like 8 research experiences. That graph is straight up in my experience of training and in practice to now it's like 38 or ERAS research experiences and 8 publications. And so this has just been the evolution of my entire training and career as an attending has been this problem. And so when I had left the University of New Mexico, I had a little bit of time and I, was able to think about this problem. And I partnered with a colleague from the University of New Mexico, and we worked, kind of went in on this together to develop this. And then I was able to kind of extend that in some other ways been able to do some intellectual property work and like really try to think about how we can really change the field forever in a positive way, not just neurosurgery, but all of science. And so it's been an exciting kind of fun thing to do. And I feel like we really get to help the students out too, who have all this pressure and it's not really fair to them. And we know there's disparities in access to research opportunities. As you go and look at this literature, the number one predictor of publishing a lot is going to a top medical school. One of the top
Right.
predictors of that is your parental income. And it's fine to have those differences, but we should then account for them instead of just saying, whoever publishes the most when people are coming from very different backgrounds. And I think that was really, really, obvious to me when I was at the University of New Mexico, and there was people going in neurosurgery that had never really done research there. And so we was able to kind of see that firsthand and make a big difference in establishing, a productive program at that time. And so that's kind of the background. I mean, I hope that covers everything, in terms
Yeah.
of.
So let's really get into this because first of all, I want to give a shout out and thank Rupert Smith who
Oh yeah,
put us in touch. You and I. He was the one that suggested contacting you to talk about this, and he's a researcher, wants to become a neurosurgeon in England, and
yeah.
he was, I guess, in the States at Temple doing some research, and
Mhm.
so by great coincidence, he was in Chicago a couple of years ago, and I went out and had drinks and met him then because he's friends with one of the residents at Rush who was at Temple and knew him
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
And all these years later, he sent me a message and said, "Hey, you should talk to Dr. Bowers about this calculator. This is a big deal." And so, we closed the circle. So thank you, Rupert, for putting us
Yes.
together. Um, but it's funny how in the course of my own career, which is very short, and my career being residency,
Yeah.
I kind of perfectly straddled the loss of step
You did.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a 6 now, and so I took step 1 for a score. The first couple of years when I was on the other side of the interviews and matching residents, we had step 1 as a score, and then all of a sudden we lost it. And that was, at least to my perception, a bright line. I think grades in medical school, even when I was a medical student, the grades, many schools were pass fail already. At my school, we were quasi pass fail, and there's some sort of honors or whatever, but who knows what that ever means. There aren't really rankings anymore.
I want to chime in for a
So
second
there,
on the grades
yeah,
topic. Okay.
yeah,
I think of the when I started residency, I had 0 research experiences. I think I published like 30 papers as a resident, and the other 170 or whatever have been since I was an attending. And this is the only paper that I wrote. I did all the primary research on, and I wrote myself. With I had someone help me put together in the end, but like that I wrote the main part of it, did all the research, read the original article. So I saw a lot of issues, not just in neurosurgery, but in other programs. And one of the topics that is covered there is that some of the more elite schools, a good chunk of them, and really all schools have shifted more towards less and less um, uh, objective criteria to be evaluated. So the really not top
right,
schools, quote, they were putting like huge super majorities of the students getting honors and very little to go off of in the words
right,
because they really essentially the idea or the premise is that these programs are wanting people to pick them off of the name, and it seems to be working to a large part. And so there's really a dearth of objective criteria anywhere, period, in this evaluation process. And I think do, doing away with step 1 was one of the most harmful things because when I was a medical student, we took step 1 at the end of second year and it was scored, and you had an idea of what was realistic for you to like kind of really pursue for a career for residency based on that score. But these poor students now, nobody knows until they're already setting up their sub I. So what if they don't do well at all on step 2 and they've
right,
set up for neurosurgery and all ththese top programs and they get a score that's and it doesn't have to be super low to not be competitive. It could be like an average, score or a little bit below. And now all of a sudden they're scrambling. What do they do? I think it really does a disservice to people. And not that step two is the only thing that matters, but I do think if you do poorly on step two, there's such a lack of objective criteria. It makes it very difficult, you know.
So that's a really good point. And actually, for all the times we've opined about the loss of step one on this podcast and in person, and just complained about it every year when we go through the match cycle, I've never heard someone make that point, because people argue about what does step one really measure? Does it actually predict success or correlate with anything? And what I always used to say was just, look, it's a test that everyone takes. It's a
Mhm.
task that everyone is assigned, and it's the same across the board. So whatever,
Exactly.
it measures your ability to do something. And then another great point that people make is, as you said, people that aren't at elite schools, who don't come from elite wealthy backgrounds, it's actually a great it levels the playing field, because it
It's
doesn't
the
matter
American
where you
dream.
are.
It's the American dream
Right,
school. You can be at the
right.
school of
But
the lowest ranked school in the world, but if you get the best score on step one, opens a door for you. Absolutely.
right. So if you're not at a place with access to a publication machine at a
Mhm.
paper mill, and if you're not at a place with, some people come from programs that don't have neurosurgery departments, so it's much harder to get sub I's, which means it's much harder to get letters. And so again, it's everyone takes the same test, everyone gets the same numerical score out of whatever. And so it really did level the playing field. But I've never heard anyone make the point that it was earlier in medical school, which means
It's
now
different.
we've just kicked the can to the next number, which comes later, which is still being used as a filter. But now, as you say, people are already spending money on sub I's, and that's a very salient point. To which I'm sure the response would be, make step two pass fail. But you're right; it's kicking the can down the road, right?
I hope, and the problem is that you can. I had a good friend that wanted to do urology, and he got a step one score back, and he kind of knew he couldn't. So all of a sudden, his third year rotations were spent with a different focus. They were really spent looking at everything, and he found he went internal medicine, and it worked out for him in a way. But like, if you don't know, you've done all your third year thinking you're going to be a neurosurgeon, and your score is low. It really puts a people in a bind, to say the least. So
Yeah,
that was very prevalent reading all of these program directors, all the literature in the different specialties. And I had originally developed this kind of idea in my own residency, in a lot of residency programs where research is emphasized. I don't think this is going to be too much of a reach for people to understand this. If you have to publish in your residency, and there's residents, which there always are, that are not super interested in research. I think in general, at least my experience was, you will find those residents slipping to the middle of papers, which is fine.
yes,
I'm not being critical. I'm just kind of pointing out a trend. And those residents that want to be academic, that are really have a passion for it, that are interested, you will tend to find them more in the first, second, third authorship positions than you will in the middle as an overall ratio. And that is really where the genesis of this idea initially came, was thinking about it with respect to in residency predictors of future, academic careers, of success in academics, of being productive. And that had been in my mind for many years. And it wasn't until this step one, step two change, and then this publication arms race really got out of control, that it was like,
yeah,
and seeing residents, medical students put each other on case reports to be 10th author on, all their case reports together, writing a series of letters to the editors to inflate their publications. And when you're a faculty member and you are short on time and you get all these interviews, there's a lot of faculty members that are stuck, left with a sheet for each person that kind of summarizes things. And that's where if you don't have time to really do a granular deep dive, it really favors those pursuing the arms race, which we don't want. We don't want students trying to produce a higher overall number of of publications if they're not more meaningful. We really want students to be able to relax a little bit about this race, focus on what they can learn, and make more impactful, higher effort, fewer quantity of higher effort publications. That was the kind of idea behind this. And so that's where this kind of developed. And Dr. Kogan and I have
yeah. I
been.
mean, that's kind of what we observed, because this podcast started in 2019. So this
Yeah.
podcast it also
Perfect.
predates the loss of the step one score. So when that was happening, we talked about it. And then the next couple of cycles, when we saw how, it's almost like evolution, it's like a biological system. When we saw how people responded to the new incentive structures, both on the program side for evaluations and the applicant side for the gamification of the applications, we talked about all these things as it evolved. And that's the first thing we said was, we had a number that we could rank people by. You took away the number, so we will find the next most available number, and
Exactly.
then everyone will gamify that number, and that's exactly what you saw. The fourth author on case reports, as you said. So this calculator was your response to this, I would say toxic shift in the medical student applicant cycle culture pursuing our field as a competitive specialty, which to no fault of anyone, because the incentive structure was tampered with in a frankly foolish way in hindsight, you could say, if you want to be generous in hindsight. And the medical students responded rationally to an irrational system. So, having set the stage, let's talk about the calculator. How does it work?
Yeah. So before we had developed the calculator, the premise behind this was this: you get a publication effort score. So people are they're totally welcome to, and you can criticize. This was never meant to be one perfect answer, because I don't think there is one perfect answer, but we got to start somewhere with some sort of objective criteria and agree that some papers require more effort than others. So let's start at the extremes. A 4-point paper is a big, your standard big, white journal, red journal, big clinical neurosurgery paper, big basic science paper. We can usually agree that's, if we're going to call that 4 points, that's a lot more than a letter to the editor, than a one
Right.
point commentary, that sort of thing. And so we started out with that. We have a case report is worth 2, and so forth. All the stuff is posted online. We've been trying to do TikToks to show people how it kind of works, and kind of walk through this series of TikToks so that people can kind of see it step by step. And it just got published in the Red Journal. But the idea was, you get this publication effort score, and then you
And
divide.
just for those listening, I will post links to all these things, so don't worry about it while we're talking. We'll have links to the paper, we'll have links to the calculator, and these videos showing how to use it. So please continue.
Perfect. Thank you. So you get this publication effort score, so 1 through 4, and then we really wanted to say, there's a funny meme where people are like, there's like 8 people around a circle, like someone's like in this recessed concrete area, and they're like digging, working super hard, and it's like, first author, and it's like et al, everyone like watching. And so there's the
Yeah.
first author does a lot of the work, obviously, on these papers. And so, you take your publication effort score, you divide it by, 1 for your first author, they keep those points. And then the second author, you divide it by 2. So if it's a 4-point paper, divide by 1. For the first author, gets 4 points. Divide it by authorship position. 4 divided by 2 is 2, so forth. And that is the publication value unit. So it's the overall value of the paper divided by the authorship position. And that's the publication value, PVU. It makes sense because people understand the relative value unit concept and RVU. And
Yeah.
we're not saying this is perfect, but we're just trying to put an objective criteria. In general, we think from 1 to 4, that is approximately weighted. We just published this. I got 2 letters I have to respond to in the Red Journal, and one of them's like, well, the number 1 journal, whether it's Lancet, JAMA, Nature, is not the same as the number 100 journal, because if it's a top 500 journal with an impact factor of 10.2 or above, we give it an extra bonus point at the end. But that's pretty rare, honestly, for medical
Yeah.
students. That is really rare. And if they have that, it's usually, no offense to the genius medical students, but it's usually because of the structure of the lab they're in, or not saying they didn't do an important role in that, but it's not, de novo in their home, and, sitting
And
there.
they're author 19 or something.
Exactly. And so the idea with this is, so we took the publication value units, and the whole goal of this is to create a better system for evaluating medical students and helping to kind of slow down this arms race. But I will be honest in that I also, as I told you, the origin was for in residency prediction of future academic careers. It was also was done with to have a system and a language that could be used not just for the medical students, but also for that whole entire field of predicting future academic work. And also the systems used for retention, promotion, and tenure, RPT committees, is also, I think, severely flawed and variable. And so to create something we can look at in that space as well. And that's not the focus of tonight's talk, but just in the mind, that was kind of a part of all this. And so with the arms race, what we had kind of discussed and thought about and implemented was, we wanted a point where there was an incentive for medical students to not try to get a bigger number, but to really stop and focus in on what they're learning, and to produce, to know it was okay, and to have a basis, a rational basis for producing less publications, but having them be ones that were more effort required to go into them. And I think that so if you have a PVU of 1 or less, then we discard that. We call that minimal effort publication, and it is discarded for the purposes of evaluating applicants. And what's nice about that is we found that, of the higher effort publications, the higher quality, when we did this initial like kind of pilot study on these like 57 applicants with 600 publications, is that the overall high number, total number of residency applicant publications did not correlate as strongly with this trend. So the more significant publications were not necessarily correlated with just total overall number. So we liked finding that too on our analysis, and that's in the paper. And so the idea here would be, and the criticism or the critique, you could, one of the most obvious ones is, well, someone spends 5 years on a basic science paper. I got it. But usually those are not the ones we're worried about evaluating. Those that are, huge basic science like stars are not the ones that we need to worry about, getting in either a PhDs or masters. And to this point, that's why I added a section in there kind of in the later on, which was this research pyramid levels for medical students. Cause I've worked with medical students for the last 8 years. When a lot of them come to me have done nothing. And so we start with little things. Hey, can you do this data mining? Can you review these 3 papers and make notes? And so it starts there and it works them all the way up to the level of like an attending, and like things I haven't achieved that are in there. Like, could you be a fully funded researcher full time? Those sorts of grant, have enough grants for that sort of thing. So for those that want to criticize it naturally, which is appropriate for the basic science part of it, it's not, we ideally envision this working with this arms race control score gives you this number, but combining that with this assessment on these levels of pyramids, because it's not just about what the overall productivity is, but also what are their capabilities? Can they come to your program and start and kind of during their research year run a lab? Can they, develop patents and like, implement computer vision clinical AI projects? Like, I'm just giving examples, but that sort of thing, like what are their overall abilities? Because at the end of the day, it's not just about productivity, especially if you're looking at MIP, minimal effort publications, but it's someone that can be productive, but also, where's their leadership abilities? Can they mentor a group of students? So I know great researchers that can't work with other people. Like, and that's, everyone has a place, but that was also kind of a concept behind this. And so we presented this at CNS, had a great reception. And as we started to kind of setting this up for a study to kind of show what this would predict, which we kind of knew, but we needed to show. First of all, the main finding, if you had one slide to show, it's the slide that shows if you're ranking by total number of residency applicant publications, kind of the old way. You have these. We had 6 students that were tied with 7 publications, and that put them tied for 14th. But when we applied the arms race control score, those 6 that were bunched together switched from like number 12 to 49 on the range. Wow. One had an arms race control score, an ARC score of 20, and the other one had like 1.5. So it immediately separated these out. And frankly, those 2 researchers had no business ever being grouped together. The one that did 7 first author, publications, whatever it was, right, and the one that basically was always 10th author on the case report. I mean, I'm being extreme, but like that kind of example. Sure. And so why were they ever being grouped together, which we know most programs kind of have that default kind of sorting by publications. Not saying every single program screens off of it, but I think it's an important criteria at most or many places within neurosurgery. And so
it's a number that you can rank. We're people at the end of the day with a stack of papers this high of applicants. It's a number that you can list people by.
Well, I remember, I'll never forget when I was we'd gotten the data, we had the data, Dr. Kogan and I had went over everything, and I was putting together the paper, reading the articles, and I remember this program director, I think he was in dermatology or one of these, super competitive fields, and he says, please, just anything, I don't care how imperfect it is, just please get us something objective to rank applicants with. And he wasn't even talking about research necessarily. It was this problem of all these applicants with no step 1 score, a step 2 score, which is not the same, to the point of like, you don't find out till the end of 3rd year or whatever. The range is much tighter between the accepted, those that with step 2 scores and not. It used to be much more spread out with step 1. So it's a much tighter range. You don't know what it means. There's a lot more high scores. And this person was like, the dean's letters all say the same things for a lot of these students. They all get, 80% of the class of a top 20 school has honors. He's like, anything, just give us something. And so that was motivating too, to kind of read and kind of say, hey, let's develop something that makes sense. It may not be perfect, but it is something that can help. And you really feel bad for the students that are in this, game that can feel desperate if you don't have access to these resources. How do you, if you're the students that never done research, like I was, couldn't find opportunities to do research, like I was back in 2000, 5, 6, 7, 8 in medical school, and if I wouldn't have matched nowadays. So how do you give those students some hope, and give them some hope that they can be successful in this process and they don't have to have 10,000 publications. And so what we once it was received really well, and we were partnered. Dr. Kogan and I partnered with Dr. Levy pretty early on, and he has been an amazing support and partner. And we took it to different programs. And one of the first feedback was, "This is awesome. Everyone loved it." But the next question is like, "Well, how are you? Who's going to calculate all this? Who's going to like sit there and like write all this up?" Especially, it's not going to be the medical students, because you're going to have them involved in a non-art. They're not going to be the first authors. You have 20 students harvesting your data. Hey, will you guys help harvest this project, harvest all this data on this paper that says you shouldn't be, you know, just doing data mining and the middle authors. And the point is not to never, by the way, be involved in those kinds of projects. You can be involved in projects for lots of reasons. There's other benefits to collaborating network, but it's the idea of like really trying
Right.
to just game the system. But when we went to
Well,
people,
yeah. So tell the program directors who are watching how onerous and difficult it is to use this calculator.
yeah, so basically the calculator, it took us about a year to develop it, but essentially you just put your last name in there, and you put your first letter, your last name, and then what I do, I just keep a Google Drive that has my papers on it, and I just copy and paste the PMIDs, PMID, comma, PMID, and you put it in, you press the calculator button. Now ERAS is the calculator came out about a year ago, but ERAS has a format where students are supposed to put in their research papers and everything else, and a PMID. And the PMID, this is not quite live yet, but we have a feature where the PMID it'll pull it out and calculate it for you now too. So you don't have to have, it's not live yet, but it's coming out very soon. You do not have to
Right.
have you don't have to copy and paste it like I do. Pretty soon it will be up and running where you just put, if you have your CV in that format, then you upload it. And that's another important point. We didn't want to be doing ERAS here where like you thought about a project and talked to your uncle about it, and like that counts as a research experience because you like did a few surveys on it or whatever. Like this really needed to be
Right.
PubMed ID, PMID in order for it to qualify. And we're going to run the predatory list of journals on it, so those are disqualified for as they run through it, because we're not interested in any of that. And so that's not going to get you to get you a score on it either.
Right. So yeah, that sounds super hard to use. I can't imagine anyone who is capable of complex brain surgery being able to figure that out. Kidding. That sounds really easy. So what are you charging for the calculator?
It's free. The calculator is free.
Right. I'm setting you up for layups here, right?
No, success. Yeah, thanks for the softball. No, I mean that was important because this is for the students. Students get charged for everything in medical school, so
Yeah.
that was really important to have it be something that they can just use. And as students use this and as programs adopt it, I think that's really the win for us, is that it can make a real impact and a difference. And I've been meeting with multiple leaders in ENT from Utah and from Rutgers, Dr. Jean Aloy, Richard Gergel and Hillary McRae at Utah, and then we have urology, Mayo Clinic Scottsdale. We have plastic surgery at NYU. All these different programs are using it, and I think it's really going to catch on and grow and to be a metric that can be valuable. Um, so back
Yeah.
going to this, so yeah, we have the different fields, the different specialties that are picking it up, and like
Yeah.
I think we presented a paper at CNS last year showing in October in Houston, showing that arms race control score did a better job than any other factor at predicting future academic careers. It was just a sampling. But then I know Dr. Isaac Yang at UCLA
Mhm.
just did a presentation has one at this upcoming meeting, and we have a little like group. Um, I kind of took this a step further into conversation for another podcast maybe, or another day, but of really trying to tackle academic fraud. And I have a startup, and so the point called Triple Helix Technologies we just launched, and it's essentially tracking using AI and computer vision, um, everyone working on projects. Like when you start a project, and uses this kind of in-depth. We have a patented technology using AI and computer vision to track all that start to finish, and it produces like a blockchain encrypted like digital product of all the work at the end. But so
Yeah.
that's kind of was a further step that kind of I'd been thinking about for a long time. Um, and so I had to. The point being, I couldn't really drive the studying of this. So we've kind of formed a group. Dr. Debraj Mukherjee, we really had volunteered or reached out, and it was super nice and wanted to kind of lead the charge of. So there's a bunch of program directors and chairs and Debraj and us on an email chain, and kind of bouncing these ideas off, and people, reaching out with different ideas, different critiques, different things, and it's been kind of fun to see all the
Yeah.
different thoughts because there's different ways to skin this cat. But I think in
Right.
general, the fact we're having the conversation is a plus.
Well, let's definitely have you back to talk about academic fraud and academic promotions, as you mentioned before, using the tool. That would be
Yeah,
a phenomenal
let me
conversation. That
just give you a little teaser on the academic fraud. There's a great podcast by Freakonomics. They did a two-part series. Stephen Dubner last January. They updated it
yes,
this January. It's phenomenal. But academic fraud is a $28 billion industry, and fraud is everywhere. And I'm going to tackle really hard because I think our field is one of the worst culprits of it, and is having like 50 authors that did very little to do with the paper.
yeah,
So this triple helix really tackles that and makes that not really possible anymore. But that's a separate thing. What I want to think about in terms of arms race control score and faculty evaluation, where I've kind of gone with this, is the way to think, and this is really relevant to publication arms race. The way to think about this, the arms race control score and what we've talked about so far really tackles the medical student side of things. All of a sudden, medical students can say, "Hey, I have to have a project where I can get a PVU greater than 1 on." It gives them some ability to kind of like at least the attendings and faculty, if this catches on, are going to know. But on the other side, you have to have a reduction in the incentive on the faculty side, in my opinion, also. And so here's where I'm going with this. Relative citation ratio, the RCR, is a much better metric than H-index. It appreciates much quicker if you have a really impactful idea. And we have a manuscript under review at a top journal right now that did this for neurosurgery and looks at it. And so for like assistant professor to associate professor, that promotion, RCR is way better because H-index just takes time no matter what, right, to accumulate to get these
yeah,
citations. RCR gives you a score based on comparison. 1.0 for your relative citation ratio is compared to the median value for someone in neurosurgery that's funded by the NIH. So what's important about this, and where I'm going with this, and we wrote a little thing in the Congress Quarterly. Clement Shermer and Ellen Ayer were nice enough to invite us after our presentation to kind of comment on this. And so I talked about kind of our duty as faculty to preserve the ecosystem or the environment of publications. We cannot be contributing or we should not be contributing to polluting the environment with garbage publications. And so the way that I see this going is, first of all, I want to see faculty evaluated on their arms race control score. Because guess what? If the faculty have no incentive to be the 10th authors that they had on a paper they had nothing to do, but it came from their department or their section of their department, then that'll go away. As far as I'm concerned, like on most papers, I'm not saying every single one. I'm not talking about randomized controlled trials. We all know the difference. I don't need to spell it out in black and white. But the papers
right,
where you're just on it because it's coming from your department, in my mind, those are essentially acknowledgments. And so I don't think
yeah,
anyone's under illusions that they wrote all the paper, the second to last author of 20 authors on a case report. Okay. And so the way I kind of envision this, the relative citation ratio, you can have it's a mean RCR. So you get a score for every paper and you want it to be high. So all of a sudden, if you are evaluated on that, one second. Hello? Hello? Yeah, I'm right here. I'll be right down. Yeah, I'll be right there.
rest for the wicked.
Yeah, it's fine. They were closing. Um, so the last concept is important, I think. My
Yeah,
opinion, maybe I'm wrong. If you have the
right.
faculty, you don't
They
calculate
don't
H.
even they don't want those papers because it
Thank you.
lowers their score.
Thank you. That is where I
Yeah,
think this is going, and I'm going to push for that till I'm no longer able to, be involved in any of this because I'm too old or not here anymore. But
right.
I think the faculty need to be evaluated not on like overall publications. I want to see the faculty evaluated on what, and then you have to kind of you decide a date in the future. Everyone's going to start going off this, but like what is your mean relative citation ratio? All of a sudden, the incentive is not just producing publications. It is producing, you're going to be evaluated on the publications the quality of them. And so I also think we would just do it on the arms race control score. So we kind of discard the ones that you're not even like really involved with. And of your contributions, what is the score of that? And all of a sudden now you have a totally different dynamic. You have faculty that don't want to publish something that's not good. And it's a totally,
Right.
maybe they're meeting with the students and they're doing an extra draft. Hey, this has to be really, really good. And that is
Yeah.
not what generally happens right now. I'm guilty of it too. I'm not on some soapbox today. This is like all the things I'm
Yeah.
talking about. I've been in the same system. So I know how much easier it is to take things on the second or third draft and have a less superior, not as high of a quality product, but know it's going to be published because we're, kind of leaders in this frailty space. And a lot of the stuff we're doing is novel. And I know the difference between like spending that extra painful time to get it to that top elite tier. So like if I put my relative citation ratio, my mean is like 1.7, which I'm super proud of for all this frailty work and everything else. But if we can make it about what your arms race control score projects are, then the reason people want to be on like 19th author on case reports or whatever is their H index goes up no matter what. There's no incentive for them not to be. So
Right.
even if you want to use H index, which I hate, use it on your arms race control score papers that you actually probably had something to do with. So not to,
Yeah.
we can talk about it forever. That's a good place to limit any questions you have
Oh,
about that. But that's where I envision this
yeah.
going.
So I think that, I mean, your passion and the degree to which you have thought about and understand this system, and I'm going to keep saying it, this game
It
is
is a game.
obvious. And that's the thing. If you think about the people who get into neurosurgery and choose to pursue neurosurgery and stay in the field and succeed, we're really good at gaming systems,
Don't
right?
forget about
Because
this is just massive economic difference.
yeah,
Not people should be doing this for the right reason, which is to serve and provide this great service.
yeah, yeah,
But you can't ignore the economic realities of someone getting into one of these not just neurosurgery, but these hyper
yeah.
competitive fields. You can you can gloss this up however you want, give all the speeches. At the end of the day, a lot of these fields, when you take it the whole group, are being chosen based on some combination of compensation with lifestyle. Obviously, neurosurgery is not
Yeah.
many of the ideal lifestyle, but it is some combination of that. And you can't be ignorant of that. And we need to do the right thing. But these are powerful
Oh, right,
folks.
right. But my point is rather that that's very true. But my point is that to become a neurosurgery resident, you've passed through so many institutions
Yes.
with their games to succeed in high school, then succeed in the game of college, succeed in the game of medical school. Everything becomes gamified, and this culture shift that you're trying to inculcate in that step of the process, that game, is just making a better set of rules so that when the people who psychotically, obsessively gamify it pursue this new metric, it's a metric that will make them better applicants who will make the field better instead of just pursuing this arbitrary number that we currently are because it's what's available.
better
Um,
researchers better researchers. I was agreeing with you. I was just saying that it's like whatever their motivation is, there's a strong incentive so people figure out a way to play the game because there's such a
yeah,
incentive for whatever the reason or the motivating factor. It's powerful in all those ways. And the last thought and comment is that Nature published this thing on. There's a paper in Nature I love, just a real letter, real short thing, and it's about super productive research, hyper productive researchers that do more than 60 publications a year. And I had a full team, like pre-residents, a couple, residents, bunch of medical students. And I was editing papers every night or most nights from like 11 till 2. And I couldn't even, not that I was trying to just get that. We were doing important research, but my point was I would know how much that would be. There are researchers that publish 200, 300 papers a year. And to be a clinician and doing that, I mean, this system has gotten so, I mean, there's medical student applicants that have 300 publications or 200. It's rare, but you see these crazy numbers. This system needs to be just dialed down in both ways and really needs to change its focus. I think in some extreme examples, it's really gotten out of control, but overall, this is not the best way. And so we can come up with a better way. And we're hoping that we can just make a contribution with this that helps in some way, even if it's awareness.
right. Right. So I'll say two things to wrap this up. One, I'm going to give
Yes.
you a free idea for a fun paper. Go
Okay.
back and get an ARC score for Harvey Cushing and
Yeah,
Dandy
exactly.
and Drake. Yeah, like just go back and do historic arc scores.
Yeah.
Because I mean, in contemporary history, the applications and the ERAS files, mine exists, and you can go back and retrospectively look at all the people who matched and how they actually did. But I wonder what's Harvey Cushing's arc score.
And
So there's
I don't know if you saw, we had a publication last month that I loved. I loved this publication. And it was just what you're saying. We took the Red Journal's history from, and it would have, the Red Journal just happened to have the data we could get. It could have been any of these journals.
yeah
45 years of their history. The number of papers with authors 5 or less from 1970 till now, it was 93% to 35% over that period.
wow
And the work to
wow
produce a paper has exponentially decreased, right? No
yes
one has to go to the library and grab, no one has to go to the library and grab like, the library, the catalogs and the journals. So why do we have to
yeah
have so many more authors? And
yeah
I think that was just as telling. And so I appreciate your time. I'm going to run down and grab this, but thanks for chatting about it, and love to, when we launch our other triple helix technologies, that is really a way that can't be gamed, to verify who did what work, and it's going to protect medical students and residents that always get bumped off papers they did the work on. This thing
yeah
uses computer vision, facial recognition software, in live real tracking, and accounts for the end of the paper. It shows you who did what on the paper. It's patented, but who did what on the paper at what part where the ideas were generated. And it's going to be impossible for people to take credit from those, because a lot of people at the bottom get pushed off.
Wow. Well, Dr. Christian Bowers, this has been exciting. I'm fired up, but I'm easily excitable.
Well,
This has
thanks
been
for chatting with me.
phenomenal. We're going to have you back and talk again.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time,
Thanks.
Dr. Wang. Appreciate you guys.